In the early 1990s, science fiction television was being dominated by the resurgence of Star Trek. But in another corner of the TV landscape, Babylon 5, created by J Michael Straczynski, proved there was room for more original sci-fi shows. Thanks to Babylon 5's pioneering production techniques and groundbreaking long-form storytelling, the series had won critical acclaim and eternal devotion from a modestly sized but loyal fanbase. Despite its achievements, however, it seemed the show would come to an abrupt end after its 4th season, with the closure of its home network PTEN. That is, until Turner Network Television swooped in at the 11th hour with an offer to renew Babylon 5 for a 5th season and more. The resulting era of the nascent franchise would prove to be one of the most troublesome behind the scenes and controversial for fans. As mentioned in Part 1, by Season 4 of Babylon 5, the Primetime Entertainment Network was on its way to shutting down, and it looked as though Babylon 5 would go down with it. It had taken 5 years to find a home for the series to begin with, and its serialized nature would make it a tough sell to a new network. And despite its high quality, the show didn't have the smash hit ratings other networks would seek to capitalize on. However, a number of other factors did make it attractive to TNT. Although founded by media mogul Ted Turner, in 1995 it had been bought by Time Warner, the parent company for Warner Brothers, which had distributed Babylon 5 in the first place. By 1998, TNT was making big strides to increase its original programming, and Babylon 5 seemed like a good choice at the time. Although the show didn't boast huge ratings, they were remarkably consistent ratings, even when the show had shifted time slots on PTEN multiple times. The viewership was also less of a factor for TNT, as being a basic cable channel rather than a broadcast network could make up the difference in subscriber numbers rather than advertising. Ostensibly, Babylon 5 had fulfilled its original role on PTEN as a flagship series for the network, and it was possible the same could be done with TNT. Therefore, as production on Season 4 was coming to an end, with the original planned season finale Sleeping in Light already completed, the show was picked up by TNT, albeit with a reduced budget for its 5th season. This necessitated holding off on Sleeping in Light until the end of Season 5, and instead the deconstruction of Falling Stars served as the Season 4 finale. Much like its original debut on PTEN, TNT was keen on promoting Babylon 5 as event television. While production on Season 5 was getting up and running, TNT offered Straczynski and the producers an opportunity to create a new cut of the original pilot movie The Gathering. The creative team jumped at the chance, making The Gathering Special Edition. The Special Edition remade several visual effects shots, replaced Stuart Copeland's score with music by Christopher Franke, and removed or re-edited several sequences. The color grading was also altered to bring the overall look of The Gathering closer to the actual show. Overall, the result is a far more streamlined version of the movie, which feels more true to the general feel of the Babylon 5 fans were more familiar with. Unfortunately, as production for Season 5 was underway, the series saw the departure of Claudia Christian as Susan Ivanova. The various accounts of why Christian left the show are numerous and contradictory. But it seems, as Season 4 was assumed by many to be the last, Christian and other cast members were already in the process of securing other work, and Christian had landed a job in London by the time the TNT renewal came through. This apparently made contract negotiations for Season 5 quite contentious between Christian, Straczynski, and the show's producers. However, this is where accounts differ. Christian has insisted over the years she was effectively fired from the show, with the producers unwilling to work around her schedule. Straczynski, on the other hand, maintains that Claudia Christian decided not to return for Season 5 of her own accord. Either way, this incident regrettably soured Christian's relationship with Straczynski and the other producers, and she left the series on less than amicable terms. However, though she wouldn't return for the next season, Christian did appear in the first 2 TV movies of 1998. Ahead of the Season 5 premiere came In the Beginning, a prequel movie depicting the Earth-Minbari War. While a lot of the movie is an economic reuse of footage already shot for the series, In the Beginning is, in my opinion, one of the best installments in the Babylon 5 franchise. In fact, this was actually my introduction to the series, and thus, even though I know I have a great deal of nostalgia for this movie, its merits go far beyond a simple filling in of the lore. Emperor Londo Mollari telling the tale of the war to two children in his palace lends the events a mythic quality, and turns a collection of disparate character arcs and plot lines into a fully cohesive story. The story is woven together so well that the reused footage feels completely seamless in its integration. Although fans of the show had heard about the war plenty throughout the first few seasons, In the Beginning still succeeds at highlighting the tragedy of the conflict, and contains many well-placed emotional punches. It's also one of Peter Jurasik's finest performances as Londo Mollari. His commentary on the Earth-Minbari War and the devastation of his homeworld leads to one of the most poignant moments in the entire series.
In my life I had 4 wives. I cared for them all deeply. But I loved Centauri Prime. Loved every inch of our world. Everything I did for her. And look what we have done to her.
And it's this emphasis on the true cost of war which elevates In the Beginning above a mere visual rendition of some well-trodden backstory.
When they ran out of ships, they used guns. When they ran out of guns, they used knives and sticks and bare hands. They were magnificent.
This is ultimately a story about two civilizations as much as it is about the war between them. The Minbari are so old, so stagnated and set in their ways, whereas humanity is just stretching its wings and making a home for itself among the stars. Yet despite their differences, both races are still subject to the same drives and emotions which govern their actions. While we saw glimpses of Delen's relationship with Dukat in Season 4, here the writing and performance for the character really helps the audience understand why his death is so devastating to Minbari society. And through humanity's eyes, the usually serene and wise Minbari are made utterly terrifying in their overwhelming power and shocking lethality. In fact, In the Beginning is one of the most visually striking entries in the Babylon 5 series. It features easily some of the best space action sequences ever depicted in the show, emphasizing building tension until reaching an explosive payoff. Although we already knew of Sheridan's accomplishments during the war, actually seeing him take out the Black Star is tense, exciting, and thrilling. Really, the strengths of the film are thanks to the production team going above and beyond what was generally required of them in making this TV movie. What could have been a rather dull piece of fan service is instead a terrific showcase of Babylon 5's characteristic thematic depth. The second television movie produced was Thirdspace, which I also have a big soft spot for. Set just after the Shadow War but before the Earth Alliance Civil War, Thirdspace sees the Babylon 5 crew come across a gigantic ancient alien artifact in hyperspace. As they investigate this mysterious object, they risk awakening something eldritch, alien, and deadly. Speaking as a huge fan of Lovecraftian horror, Thirdspace is a gift of a movie. While many of the tropes are familiar, even touched on already by Babylon 5 itself, Straczynski's evident passion for the material, Jesus Trevino's sharp direction, and the excellent performances from the cast make Thirdspace an engrossing slice of existential horror mixed with spectacular space opera. Christopher Frankie's music, the deliberate pacing and committed acting from every member of the ensemble succeeds in building a palpable sense of rising dread. Like the best kind of horror movie, the viewer wants to yell at the characters they should simply leave this artifact well alone and stop kicking the hornet's nest. Despite my fondness for the movie, however, I will admit the climax is slightly disappointing, if only because the extra-dimensional villains of the piece are a bit of a letdown. The Shadows already nailed that Lovecraftian ancient threat in design and execution, which makes them an extremely tough act to follow. The aliens seen in Thirdspace, while powerful, just aren't as memorable. Their ships seem a bit too generic, and it seems the visual effects of the day weren't really up to the task of depicting the actual creatures themselves in an impactful way either. That being said, the final action set piece is still riveting. Close quarters combat on the station, and an epic space battle outside, with Sheridan embarking on a daring spacewalk in the middle of it all. And true to its Lovecraftian inspirations, although our main characters survived this time, the implication of there being more of these kinds of artifacts still out there, waiting to be discovered, leaves the audience with an appropriate feeling of unease.
One mistake out of so many others.
While ultimately Thirdspace is inconsequential to the grander scope of the series, it's still something I happily rewatch for a solid, standalone Babylon 5 adventure. Having wrapped production on the first 2 TV movies, the cast and the crew could finally get stuck into the 5th season. Joining the cast as somewhat of a replacement for Ivanova was Captain Elizabeth Lochley, played by Tracy Scoggins. With an enthusiasm for physical fitness, Scoggins taught sports and physical education out of high school before becoming a model on the European circuit. By the time she returned to the United States, she decided to pursue acting, studying at the Herbert Berghoff studio. She quickly found work with numerous guest roles on shows like The Dukes of Hazzard, Remington Steele, and T.J. Hooker. Before Babylon 5, she was best known for the semi-regular role of Cat Grant on Lois and Clark: The New Adventures of Superman. Babylon 5's 5th season is quite controversial among fans, to put it mildly. While I do agree it's the weakest season of the show, it's far from the dumpster fire some have insisted it is. It suffers from a reduced budget and many of the major storylines already being wrapped up in Season 4, leaving Season 5 scrambling to properly fill out its 22 episodes. However, many of the creative choices made for the season do make a lot of sense, and the quality of episodes is still consistently strong overall. The stories the season tells are good ones, but the plotting and pacing is where the issues lie. And while the loss of Claudia Christian's Ivanova is keenly felt, Tracy Scoggins as Captain Lochley is a great addition to the show. Being an outsider gives Lochley a fresh perspective of past events and of the status quo of the station itself. Her clashes with Garibaldi over which side of the Civil War she fought on causes us as viewers to question our own perspective of events as well.
I was on the side that says it's not the role of the military to set policy, or depose presidents, or fire on our own ships. You asked me if I took up arms against my own government. The answer is no. My job is to protect the men and women who serve under my command, and I will perform that job with every last breath I've got. I am a soldier, Mr. Garibaldi. And as such, my vocabulary is rather limited. I only really understand 3 words. Loyalty, duty, honor. If I did it your way, one of those would have to go. Then the other 2 would become meaningless.
Her relationship to Bester is similarly contrasting. While the characters and the viewer sees Bester as a threat, Lochley has a wholly different experience with him.
A rogue telepath was messing with my people. First, cheating them in the casino, and later he killed 2 of them because they found out what he was. We couldn't find them. Bester did. And he saved the lives of 2 of my crew. Now, I don't actually like him, and I sure as hell don't trust him. But so far, he has not done anything unpleasant to me. I'm sure he will, because this place seems to bring that out in everyone. But until then, I have an obligation to be courteous.
Yet Lochley herself, despite these differences, is never portrayed as a negative presence. While candid in conversation and strict in command style, the discovery that she was once married to John Sheridan confirms to us her sense of moral integrity regardless of her divergent views with the rest of the main cast. And despite the character's sometimes sparse appearances throughout the season, it's once again a testament to Straczynski's talent for creating characters that Lochley actually became well liked by fans of the show, despite replacing a fan favourite like Susan Ivanova. And Lochley is by no means where the positives of Season 5 end. In general, I do agree that Season 5 is the weakest season of the show, but that by no means makes it outright bad. While the overarching storylines of the season have their issues, the season boasts some of the best standalone episodes of the entire series. The Long Night of Londo Mollari sees Londo suffer a near-death experience, taking the audience on a bizarre, esoteric journey through his subconscious. Having seen G'Kar and Londo as bitter enemies and unlikely allies, by Season 5 their relationship has morphed into a strange form of almost friendship. While G'Kar can never forgive Londo for his past actions, he's formed something between begrudging respect and profound pity for him. And it's this bizarre place the 2 have found themselves in which cuts through the weirdness of the episode to once again deliver an emotional punch to the audience.
I'm sorry. Shakar.
A view from the gallery, taking a leaf from Shakespeare's Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, follows two station maintenance workers going about their duties while Babylon 5 is besieged by a malevolent alien threat. The nature and origin of this threat is really unimportant in the grand scheme of things, because to Mac and Bo it doesn't matter if it was the Shadows, the Drak, or the Centauri, their day would be the same. Raymond O'Connor and Lawrence LeJeune are strong guest stars with a fun dynamic. While Mac is the salt-of-the-earth cynic content to keep his head down and focus on his work, Bo is much more curious, often becoming distracted by the larger narrative going on around them. As the battle around the station intensifies, we follow the duo as they stumble across the regular cast as if encountering scenes from a play. While we as the viewer are extremely familiar with all aspects of these characters and their relationships, Mac and Bo's commentary provides us with a fresh insight into them. Their impromptu escort mission for Delenn and Mac voicing his approval of Captain Lochley are wonderfully written and performed scenes.
I know you're new here and all, and I just wanted to say, you're okay in my book, ma'am.
Thank you.
A few episodes after A View from the Gallery comes Day of the Dead, penned by guest writer and celebrated author Neil Gaiman, and let's just say it shows. For the Brakiri Day of the Dead, they rent a section of the station for one night, which effectively becomes part of the Brakiri homeworld. That night, several characters, while trapped in their quarters, encounter people from their lives who had died years before. Much like A View from the Gallery, the exact mechanics of what is actually happening during these events is really besides the point of the story. Instead, the story laser focuses on the characters and their interactions with the apparent ghosts appearing in their quarters. Londo is reunited with Adira, Garibaldi spends the night with Dodger, Lanier is met by Mr. Morden, and Lochley sees Zoe, a close friend of hers who died of a drug overdose. This is an episode steeped in tragedy, not just the past tragedy these ghosts remind the characters of, but how most of the characters, in a way, waste the incredible opportunity presented to them. Garibaldi and Lochley are too focused on the how of what's happening rather than the why. They waste precious time trying to get through to the rest of the station, coming close to missing out on the chance to confront their past guilts and regrets. Garibaldi, being revisited by Dodger, is reminded of his earlier days where he played things fast and loose, not caught up in the fate of the galaxy scale conflicts he is now. Having recently reconnected with Lise Hampton, the true love of his life, and the possibility of starting a family on the horizon, seeing Dodger again reminds him of an ostensibly more innocent and carefree time in his life, but naturally, at the time, he couldn't see it that way. It's also fitting for Lochley to see Zoe, the friend whose horrific death was the very thing which drove Lochley to eventually enlist in Earth Force. The difficult question Lochley has always asked, did Zoe take her own life and was it her fault, is something which has hung over the character's head for many years, because it also raised a question concerning her decision to join Earth Force in the first place. Was she running away from guilt or towards responsibility?
I didn't want to hurt you, but yeah, I did do it on purpose. I just couldn't go on. Don't hate me.
I could never hate you.
It's a meditative, moving, and fascinating episode which takes characters who already had plenty of depth and enriches them even more. The Core is Mother, the Core is Father also takes a leaf out of A View from the Gallery's book by coming at the usual Babylon 5 adventure from a totally different perspective. Here we follow a day in the life of Alfred Bester, as he takes two raw Psychop recruits on a mission to track down a rogue telepath who has murdered his roommate and fled to Babylon 5. Walter Koenig is simply brilliant in this episode, and by viewing events from his perspective, it helps the viewer understand why he behaves the way he does around the Babylon 5 crew. At the Psy-Corps, Bester is a hero to many of its members. He's charming, approachable, and patient with new recruits. It's a far cry from the Bester we've come to know by this point. In fact, Bester comes across as such a positive figure for the first part of the episode that when he's confronted with the thinly veiled antagonism of the Babylon 5 crew, It almost makes the regular characters seem unreasonable and unjustly hostile. In fact, the episode does such a great job at getting the viewer on Bester's side that it's a real shock when Bester and his pupil murder one of their prisoners in hyperspace. He truly sees the Psi Corps as a force for good, and is fully committed to his job, even when that job puts him face to face with people who would rather see him dead. In a world where he has to fight to protect his people, the act of killing mundanes is completely justifiable from his perspective. While we may not agree with his actions, we at least understand them. Speaking of telepaths though, this brings us to one of the main story arcs this season concerning Byron and his colony of rogue telepaths. This storyline is divisive among fans to say the least, and I'd be lying if I said I didn't see where a lot of the criticisms were coming from. I think the issue with the story really comes down to the characters it introduces. Byron and his colony of rogue telepaths aren't as rich and compelling as is typical for Babylon 5. Byron's long-winded speeches and endless quoting of Shakespeare comes across as quite pretentious, and the others in the colony feel a bit two-dimensional. That's not to say there's nothing good about this arc or this character. For the most part, the romance between Byron and Lita really works. Throughout this season, a lot of Lita's frustrations and anger is completely justified.
Zach, how come the only time people come to see me is when they want something from me? Scan someone, protect someone, set up the Vorlon so you can take him out. I nearly got my brain fried at Zahadum, but nobody comes just to visit.
Having played a crucial role in the Shadow War and the Earth Alliance Civil War, Lita is kicked out of her apartment on the station and forced to effectively rejoin the Psi Corps without Sheridan, Delenn, Garibaldi, or Franklin even attempting to help her out. Now to be clear, this is not a flaw in the story, in fact it's a tantalizing direction to take the character in. After walking alongside godlike beings helping to save the galaxy, Lita's arc in Season 5 brings her back down to Earth, so to speak, which is why meeting Byron is such a relief for her character, someone who treats her like an actual person and promises a future where she can be free. What is odd, however, is the apparent revelation that all telepaths were in fact created by the Vorlons to fight the Shadows, which is something we as viewers actually already knew since the latter half of Season 3. It's treated in the story like a throwing down of the gauntlet for Byron's crusade, but in practice it doesn't really change anything. Early on, the colony causes political troubles for Sheridan and Lochley, so Bester is brought in to deal with them, but the colony is given a last-minute reprieve, only for the presence of the colony to again cause political problems for Sheridan and Lochley, who were forced to bring in Bester again to deal with them. And while the situation does escalate much further the second time, for a lot of the season it feels like this storyline is running in place. The truly interesting development of Lita creating an underground army to one day take on the Psi Corps directly with the help of her Vorlon enhanced abilities and Garibaldi's corporate funds is only touched on in the last few episodes of the season, but I feel like this could have supported an entire story arc of its own. Instead, too much time is taken up by retreading ground with Byron and his colony. Thankfully, this thread did see a resolution in the excellent Telepath trilogy of tie-in novels, but watching only the setup to a compelling storyline without the payoff does feel quite frustrating. The other major story arc this season suffers from almost identical problems, albeit with a proper payoff this time. Having formed the Interstellar Alliance, Sheridan and Delenn investigate mysterious attacks on the member world's shipping lanes, which threaten to destabilize the Alliance and sow discord between the various races of the galaxy. Now, in general, this feels like a logical and even exciting direction to take Babylon 5 in. Having been on the front lines with fleets of starships in epic space battles, switching to a West Wing in space style format has a lot of promise. Sheridan's command style was always about bold and daring actions, diving in headfirst to a volatile situation and fighting his way to a solution, which is why Sheridan becoming president of the Interstellar Alliance opens up a great avenue for character growth. Here he can't always use brute force to get the job done. Instead, he must navigate a labyrinth of political machinations where no one is telling the whole truth. However, the way this storyline unfolds in the season seems to miss many of these great opportunities. Sheridan doesn't have much input with the Telepath colony in the grand scheme of things, and the plot of the shipping line attacks is drawn out for far too long. Like the Telepath colony plot, this arc seems to run in place for a long time. Also, like the Telepath colony arc, the audience is ahead of the characters. When Londo and G'Kar try to investigate some strange activity on Centauri Prime, the episode ends by showing the viewer it is the Centauri who are responsible for the attacks, yet the characters in the show only discover this 6 episodes later. Thankfully, when this revelation does come, the season finally starts to take off. Sheridan and Delenn are forced into making difficult decisions to keep the Alliance alive, Franklin and Lita engage in some espionage on the Drazi homeworld, and Garibaldi has to confront his descent back into alcoholism. However, it's Londo and G'Kar's plotline which naturally takes centre stage. Here we come to the tragic conclusion of Londo's rise to power, when it's revealed the Drak have manipulated the Centauri into going to war, and in order to bring an end to the war and save his people, Londo must become Emperor as the Drak's puppet. The way all of this unfolds is simply heartbreaking. Even Regent Verini, previously a comical character, meets one of the saddest ends of anyone in the series.
I have been many things in my life, Mollari. I have been quiet when I should have spoken. I have been foolish. And I have wasted far too much time. But I am still Centauri. And I am not afraid.
And Londo's final goodbye to G'Kar never fails to make me tear up a little.
After tonight, I don't know that I will ever see you again. And I wanted to say goodbye. They say the position changes you. And I just... I wanted to...
I understand.
Isn't it strange, G'Kar? When we first met, I had no power and all the choices I could ever want. And now I have all the power I could ever want. And no choices at all.
Understand that I can never forgive your people for what they did to my world. But I can forgive you.
But at last Londo Mollari gets everything he ever wanted. A man so consumed by ambition he never saw the darkness of the path he walked until it was too late and he no longer had any choice. A ruinous end for the character, but in some ways it was the only end he could ever meet. In spite of the shortcomings of the season, where it truly excels is in its final 3 episodes: Objects in Motion, Objects at Rest, and Sleeping in Light. Rather than some epic final battle or an implication of continuing adventures with these characters aboard Babylon 5, instead the finale is content to spend almost 3 hours simply saying goodbye to these people and this place. Life simply goes on, taking Garibaldi, Franklin, G'Kar, Lita, Sheridan, and Delenn to places beyond the station. Though their lives continue, it's clear their time on Babylon 5, much like the audience, has meant a great deal to them, a fact which is beautifully articulated by G'Kar.
I believe that when we leave a place, part of it goes with us, and part of us remains. Go anywhere in the station when it is quiet, and just listen. After a while, you will hear the echoes of all our conversations, every thought and word we've exchanged. Long after we are gone, our voices will linger in these walls for as long as this place remains.
The one sticking point I have with this finale is the way Lanier's character arc is handled. Bill Mumy, much like Stephen Furst as Veer, was an endearing presence on the show, quietly heroic and wise beyond his years. But over the course of the show, we come to learn that Lanier is in fact deeply in love with Delenn, and though he can never bring himself to get in the way of her relationship with Sheridan, his feelings force him to pursue a life in the Rangers away from her. During Objects at Rest, however, he suffers a moment of weakness where he briefly abandons Sheridan to die during an accident aboard the White Star. Though he overcomes this, the shame of his actions forces him to leave the ship and the Rangers to one day redeem himself. Although I have no problem with the characters being taken in unexpected directions, this change in Lanier has always felt a bit sudden. We see the beginning and end of this arc, but a lot of the development happens off-screen. It feels as though we never got a chance to fully understand what Lanier was going through and all of the steps which led him to this dark place. It's not something which significantly brings down the quality of the episode or anything, but it is a rough patch on an otherwise excellent finale. The final episode is where the show really tugs at the heartstrings though, with Sleeping in Light. Set 20 years after Objects at Rest, the episode sees Sheridan coming to the end of his life, the energy which sustained him, given to him by Lorien, finally running out. Due to how unexpected the renewal by TNT was, Sleeping in Light was originally shot at the end of Season 4, replaced by the deconstruction of Falling Stars when a 5th season was greenlit. Because of this, Sleeping in Light has the good fortune of featuring almost all the mainstays from the cast, including Claudia Christian as a now bitter General Susan Ivanova. The episode really functions as an extended tribute to the legacy of the show, its characters, and the stories it told. The performances are pitch perfect all around, with each character putting on a brave face as Sheridan's last day draws ever closer. Returning to where the Shadow War ended, Sheridan is greeted by an old friend as his life comes to an end.
Did you think we had forgotten you? We have been waiting for you.
Beyond the rim.
Yes.
Can I come back?
No. This journey is ended. Another begins. Time to rest now.
Well, look at that. The sun's coming up.
The crew meets for one last time aboard the decommissioned station to watch its demolition. J Michael Straczynski himself makes a fitting cameo as the maintenance worker who shuts down Babylon 5 and transitions us to the station's final send-off, carried by Christopher Frankie's incredible score. Babylon 5's final year may have had its ups and downs, but the end of the series is easily one of the best conclusions to any TV show. However, that is not where the tales of the Babylon 5 universe ended. Broadcast during the 5th season but set afterwards is the third TV movie, River of Souls. With Babylon 5 under Lochley's command, the station is rocked by the arrival of an archaeologist possessing a soul hunter orb containing the consciousness of an entire species. This is really Lochley's time to shine, as she takes centre stage in this movie, no longer playing second fiddle to Sheridan or the other main characters, although Garibaldi is more than welcome in a supporting role. River of Souls on a whole is enjoyable, but it does feel like a single episode script stretched out to feature length. There's a not particularly engaging or funny subplot surrounding a hollow brothel on the station, which is very Gene Roddenberry if you know what I mean. But outside of that, the central premise is an enticing one, with guest stars Ian McShane and Michael Sheen delivering typically great performances throughout. It is jarring at first to see such a recognisable actor caked in alien makeup, but Sheen's committed performance in the writing for this particular Soul Hunter surprisingly creates quite a lovely character. As we discover, this Soul Hunter, despite being 300 years old, is considered very young among his own people, and this definitely shows in the performance. In contrast to the first two Soul Hunters seen in Season 1, who were very creepy indeed, this Soul Hunter is kinder, more patient, and seems to genuinely care for other living beings. The ideas the movie wrestles with are also fascinating, the Ralgans being on the verge of evolving into Vorlon-like beings, being snatched away by the Soul Hunters at the moment of their ascension, and driven mad by 1,000 years of imprisonment is brilliant. However, the actual threat these trapped souls present is a bit underwhelming. Their anger leads them to try and destroy the station by blowing up the main reactor, but beyond that they don't do much else. The exciting prospect of Babylon 5 turning into a haunted house with tormented ghosts on the loose isn't capitalized on the way it should have been. It feels like a lot of build-up to not much of a climax. While disappointing in some ways, River of Souls is still a solid B5 story, and hints at the promise of more stories set in this post-Season 5 era of the station under Lochley's command. However, it seems Straczynski, Copeland, and Netter wanted to explore other parts of the universe. The fourth TV movie, A Call to Arms, serves as the backdoor pilot for Babylon 5's spin-off show Crusade, but more on that later. A Call to Arms sees Sheridan and a few others met with visions of an impending attack by the Drak. Meeting up with Earth Force Captain Anderson and Thieves Guild member Darina, Sheridan takes 2 prototype destroyers and goes rogue to stop the Drak using a shadow planet killer against Earth. Speaking for myself, A Call to Arms is easily my least favourite of the Babylon 5 TV movies. It seems to be so concerned with being a backdoor pilot that it becomes all plot rather than story. There's a lot of moving pieces to put into place, and to be fair to Straczynski's script and Michael Veder's direction, those pieces are put together in a creative way. However, when it comes to the emotional component of the story, the drama of the characters, there isn't much to go on. Hints of it are peppered throughout, such as Darina's anger towards Sheridan, and Garibaldi and Lochley thinking Sheridan might be going mad with his ravings about seeing visions, but these elements don't conjure much story material. Instead, it's a lot of work to get to a climactic space battle, which isn't exactly the most thrilling action sequence when it pulls out all of the sound and we're left with a montage of Sheridan and Anderson mouthing the word fire over and over again. Furthermore, the ending of this battle, which sees the Drak deploying a plague in Earth's atmosphere after their planet killer is destroyed, doesn't pack much of a punch. I feel like this should have been the primary focus of the plot rather than the Shadow Death Cloud. After all, one of Babylon 5's principal characters is a xenobiology expert with a habit of getting into spy antics. It seems odd to instead focus on Sheridan running a demo of the new ship for a big chunk of the runtime. It's not exactly the most promising way to set up the spin-off show. The spin-off show itself, however, is another matter entirely. Just like Babylon 5, Crusade was a show born out of practicality. As a production, Babylon 5 never had the resources to go off and explore strange new worlds every week. The demands on sets, locations, and costumes were beyond the show's modest budget. But over the course of Babylon 5, the production team had learned how to stretch their resources and deliver stories large in scope without going over budget. Which is why when TNT offered Straczynski the chance to create a spin-off series, changing the setting to a ship exploring the galaxy seemed not only logical, but also practical. Production designer John Iacovelli and the team at Netter Digital Entertainment, which had taken over from Foundation Imaging in producing Babylon 5's visual effects, had begun experimenting with virtual sets and CG set extensions. These methods allowed the production to remain studio-based while still convincingly portraying a vast array of different worlds and environments. Thus, Straczynski came up with a suitable premise for a spaceship-bound show within the Babylon 5 universe. The Drak, former servants of the Shadows, contaminate Earth with a mutagenic plague, which will wipe out all life on the planet within 5 years. Therefore, the crew of the IAS Excalibur venture out into the galaxy to find a cure. The Excalibur itself was primarily designed by concept artist Luke Mayrand. At first, the design resembled a beefed-up White Star, before Mayland leaned more into the Minbari cruiser shape.
Joe saw this one sketch and said, "Oh, I really like that, but, it looks like that should be going the other way."
So we wound up turning that design around, and that's what was really the final configuration of having the wings in the back and the long boom and the nose of the ship. And then we looked at it and thought, you know, the lower fin on that doesn't seem to really do much. It's kind of in the way. So we took out the lower fin and left it with the 3 fins, and it looked great.
Carrying over from A Call to Arms were the techno-mage Galen and expert thief Darina Nafeel, played by Peter Woodward and Carrie Dobro respectively. Peter Woodward, son of renowned British actor Edward Woodward, led an acclaimed career with the Royal Shakespeare Company after graduating college. He also trained at the British Academy for Dramatic Combat, which led him to a dual career as an actor and fight arranger. Before Crusade, he was best known for portraying the villainous Ernst Stossel in the World War II drama The Brill Cream Boys. Carrie Dobro had actually appeared in Babylon 5 before in the episodes Exogenesis and Racing Mars. Her dancing and gymnastics background made her well suited to playing a variety of roles which demanded heavy makeup and physical prowess. Before Babylon 5, she was a lead in the cancelled science fiction series Hypernauts. During production of Crusade, a design change occurred with Darina's makeup. While at first she retained the forehead scales from A Call to Arms, these were later removed and the overall design was streamlined. Also carrying over from A Call to Arms was Margene Holden. However, while she played an unnamed navigator in A Call to Arms, she was brought over to Crusade to play the role of Dr. Sarah Chambers. Holden's background as a martial artist and stuntwoman landed her roles in Mortal Kombat Annihilation as well as the Beastmaster television series. She also landed guest roles in Deep Space Nine and The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air before joining Crusade. The ship's first officer and resident telepath was John Matheson, played by Daniel Day Kim. Kim was a regular guest star on numerous TV shows throughout the 90s, including both Star Trek Voyager and Star Trek Enterprise, as well as CSI, NYPD Blue, and The Shield. To help explore the ruins of various alien civilizations, the Excalibur enlists the help of Max Eilerson, played by David Allen Brooks. Much like Daniel Day Kim, Brooks had a steady career as a TV guest actor, with the occasional foray into feature films. He had appeared in Quantum Leap, Walker, Texas Ranger, as well as the films Manhunter and The Kindred. For the captain of the ship, veteran explorer Matthew Gideon would be given command of the Excalibur, played by Gary Cole. Cole was a familiar face on American television at the time, having already played leading roles in Midnight Caller and American Gothic. The same year Crusade was released, he also played the highly memeable Bill Lumbergh in the comedy Office Space. As with Babylon 5, production of Crusade utilised some cutting-edge technology of the day, such as computer-generated pre-visualization, to assist in the construction of sets and the design of the virtual environments. When it came to filming, however, it wasn't long before the producers of the show began to clash with the executives at TNT. Straczynski originally wanted Crusade to begin in the middle of the action, with the Excalibur already on its quest to find the cure for the Drakh Plague. He had written the episode Racing the Night as the show's first episode. However, TNT asked Straczynski to create a more traditional pilot episode, which would show the crew assembling aboard the Excalibur for the first time. In Straczynski's mind, much of the setup of the Excalibur and its mission had already been taken care of with A Call to Arms, but nevertheless, he obliged. While this more traditional pilot was intended to be shown in flashback, TNT would end up airing the episodes out of their original production order, making the originally planned first episode into the 8th episode. This created a number of continuity issues for the season. The most noticeable of these is with the uniforms. While the Excalibur crew initially wore a grey and red uniform, Straczynski later opted for a simpler black uniform, which could look smart but also practical. But because of the change in episode order, the first uniforms were introduced second and the second uniforms were shown first. If this sounds somewhat confusing and chaotic, this is apparently representative of the production process as a whole. While the producers had essentially been given carte blanche from early on in Babylon 5, the executives at TNT were much more hands-on, and this is where things get complicated. Despite Babylon 5's 5th season and the TV movies being a ratings success, concerns were growing about Babylon 5's viewership. After some research, it was found that the audience for Babylon 5 didn't spill over into watching other TNT original programming, which was concerning for a basic cable channel. Straczynski has asserted over the years that because of this new data, the executives at TNT made a conscious effort to sabotage the production of Crusade in order to back out of their deal with Babylonian Productions, claiming the producers hadn't delivered the show they promised. The tension and bad blood between the producers and executives eventually reached its peak roughly halfway through the production of the season, and before the first episode of Crusade was even broadcast, TNT had already decided to cancel the series. Thanks to Straczynski's close ties to internet fan sites, this cancellation was quickly met with a public backlash. Amidst this outcry, the Sci-Fi Channel stepped in looking to pick up Crusade, but unfortunately a deal couldn't be reached with TNT, and so Crusade was unfortunately destined to be only a short-lived 13-episode-long spin-off. Crusade's reputation with the Babylon 5 fanbase is mixed to say the least. However, it has many vocal supporters as well as detractors. It's a difficult show to judge as it's really only a small piece of what was meant to be a much larger picture. What we do have to examine shows a lot of promise, but it also has a fair few problems. In terms of production design and art direction, Crusade is a fantastic looking series. I love the look of the Excalibur. It's one of those instantly iconic ship designs, and despite Crusade only being a blip on the pop culture radar, the Excalibur is a constant fixture with Starship enthusiasts. Where the look of the show is let down though is with the visual effects. It's not that the visual effects are bad, but they're inconsistent. For the most part, a lot of the space-based scenes hold up a lot better than those in Babylon 5. Even some of the virtual sets and digital extensions look terrific. But every now and then, it seems the technology just wasn't up to the task at hand. I don't know if the production problems had an impact on some of these scenes, but every now and then it looks as if the characters have suddenly been plonked in front of an elaborate screensaver. That inconsistency also applies to the music of the show. To differentiate the series from Babylon 5, the producers hired Evan H. Chen to score Crusade, and he certainly has a unique style as a composer. There's a sense of experimentalism with Crusade's music. A constant blend between traditional acoustic instruments and ambient electronica. And whenever the music is called upon to give a scene a strange, esoteric atmosphere, it excels. But whenever it's required to give the scenes some spectacle, excitement, and awe, it utterly fails. A lot of this inconsistency and strangeness is distilled in the show's main theme. We start with some ambient, otherworldly synth supporting the beginnings of what sounds like a rousing, heroic theme. Which is then accompanied by bursts of jazzy-sounding trumpets. Before breaking into some industrial techno. And finally capped off with discordant artificial brass. It's quite strange. The shortcomings of the music are especially prevalent where Crusade again pulls out all of the sound for a bafflingly silent space battle sequence. It may seem like I'm harping on this one thing, but music is such an important component in carrying the drama of a series, but the music in Crusade distracts from that drama more than anything else. It ends up hurting the storytelling rather than helping it. Thankfully, that inconsistency doesn't apply to the cast, who are strong across the board, though some get more chances to shine than others. Gideon, in the pantheon of Babylon 5 heroes, is a fresh departure from the likes of Sinclair and Sheridan. Whereas Babylon 5's commanders and captains all had a mythological aura to them, Captain Gideon wouldn't look out of place on a New York building site.
I'll do whatever's necessary. If that means turning the entire galaxy upside down and shaking its pockets to see what falls out, that's what I'll do. I'm not subtle, I'm not pretty, and I'll piss off a lot of people along the way. but I'll get the job done.
He thrives when getting his hands dirty, playing high-stakes poker in the more seedy establishments of the galaxy, and relishing the chance to pull off some daredevil antics. On the whole, he's a much darker character, not above letting his fists do the talking or making threats and using blackmail to get what he wants.
We're not leaving without that ship. He can take us there, but I'll need you to translate whatever we find. So that's the deal. Take it, or we leave you here.
You're bluffing.
I never bluff.
Yet at the same time, he still embodies more traditionally heroic qualities. His policy of always responding to distress calls and never leaving a man behind showcases a compassionate side of the character, even if the overall package is quite rough around the edges. The mysterious Apocalypse box he possesses is one of the parts of the show in this character which is unfortunately left unexplored due to the cancellation. The origin of the box, passed from person to person like something from an old ghost tale, its abilities and relationship to Gideon is a compelling mystery. Max Eilerson is also a fantastic addition to the crew. He's so thoroughly egotistical and self-centered, yet David Allen Brooks is magnetic to watch in the role, injecting the character with a healthy amount of dark humour and sleazy charisma. While he's quite unlikable in a lot of ways, it's also clear he does have a strong sense of moral integrity. He isn't an adept fighter or even that brave, but he still uses his skills as a seasoned corporate backstabber to protect those who he sees as friends.
You come within 10 feet of one of these. I'm not a killer. Not if I can avoid it. But in this case, I don't have to do anything because if you come near either one of us or bother us, you will be your own executioner. You will now go back under whatever rock you climbed out from. You will leave my wife alone. You will leave me alone. And you will return my cat. Not only that, you will bathe and groom him because I don't know where he's been. And I don't want him coming back with anything. Is that clear?
Matheson and Chambers don't quite get as much time to shine. Daniel Day Kim and Margene Holden both deliver solid performances, but they largely play second fiddle to the others. That being said, Matheson still gets some strong scenes throughout the series, illustrating a new plight for the telepaths in this post-Psychor world. While telepaths are free to go about openly in society, Matheson often feels the need to represent the best of his people. One slip-up or outburst could mean an end to his newfound freedom, and the pressure gets to him at times. Chambers, on the other hand, is resigned to mostly technical dialogue, with the occasional bursts of fun banter here and there. Her best moments come in the episodes The Needs of Earth and Each Night I Dream of Home, but we'll get to those later. Galen and Darina, however, are the real show-stealers. Techno-mages have always been an intriguing part of the Babylon 5 universe, as well as just a cool concept on the face of things. The concept of the character alone gives Woodward so much rich dialogue and fascinating story threads to sink his teeth into.
If you wanted to think, you should never have joined the military in the first place. But there are good planets and there are bad planets. There are healthy planets and unhealthy planets. There are safe planets and dangerous planets.
I thought you said you don't hold a grudge.
I don't. I have no surviving enemies.
When will you come back?
In the fullness of time. Expect me when you see me.
He rattles off made-up sci-fi mumbo-jumbo with astonishing speed and conviction, all the while being funny, charismatic, and deeply mysterious. Galen's arc in the series is another element left unresolved, but the small glimpses we get of the real Galen behind all the smoke and mirrors is captivating to say the least. Carrie Dobro as Darina is similarly engaging to watch. Her short staccato speech pattern makes everything she says land with considerable impact, and Dobro's physical performance is equally impressive.
I wanted to check in, and the quickest way to do that was to draw your attention. I was captured because I chose to be.
You talk pretty good for someone who's all chained up.
What chains?
Initially, Darina only joins the mission to seek revenge on the Drak for destroying her homeworld, but along the way she becomes attached to the crew and their cause. Over time, her tough exterior is chipped away to reveal a traumatized, guilt-stricken, and very vulnerable person underneath.
Those people were slaves on their way to being sold.
Slavery is legal in this part of space. Why did we have to be the...
Because when I was stuck in that room waiting and praying for help, nobody did it for me.
Much of Crusade is perfectly serviceable. These are solid episodic sci-fi adventures. But while being standalone stories, much like Babylon 5's first season, these one-off stories also help flesh out the wider universe and do feature some recurring elements as well. For one thing, Captain Lochley's appearances are more than welcome in the show. Tracy Scoggins was excellent in Babylon 5 and River of Souls, so it's cool to see the character continue in Crusade. For me, the only episode I don't think worked at all was Visitors from Down the Street. Perhaps at the time of X-Files hype, this extended spoof would have seemed appropriate, but in isolation, I found it to be meandering, awkward, and not particularly funny. Thankfully though, Crusade's episode quality never dropped to this level at any other point, and in many cases excelled. The Path of Sorrows is one such episode. The Excalibur crew retrieve an alien life form encased in a glass bubble, which seems to have some kind of telepathic ability, which prompts Gideon, Matheson, and Galen to relive traumatic events from their past. It's really an anthology episode which serves to enrich each character. These small, self-contained stories feel like glimpses of much larger narratives, but they succeed in getting the viewer invested in a very short amount of time. Evan H. Chen's music also enhances the episode greatly, conjuring an eerie, dreamlike atmosphere around this mysterious being. It's an episode which succeeds in its experimentalism in every way. The intended original pilot episode Racing the Night is easily my favourite of the whole show. While investigating a perfectly preserved but deserted ancient alien city, members of the survey team are dissected by an unseen force lurking beneath the surface of the planet. Taking inspiration from Forbidden Planet and H.P. Lovecraft, Racing the Night begins as an unsettling bit of sci-fi horror which balloons into an explosive action set-piece and finally leads to a disturbing moral quandary. Had this been the first episode, it would have been a fantastic opener for the series. The scenes originally intended to introduce each character are packed with great dialogue, especially Irelison's long-winded speech about corporations.
Good business is good for everyone. Out of calamity comes opportunity. Nations rise and fall, planets live and die. But corporations go on and on through good times and bad. Because it's all about profit.
And although the climactic exposition dump from one of the city's denizens does go on at length, it's paced wonderfully. There's a fan-pleasing appearance from the shadows, and an enticing moral challenge put to Gideon.
Would you sacrifice 100 lives to save your 10 billion? If 100, why not 1,000? Why not 10,000?
There are other ways.
I'll never know if you find a cure, but if you do, you remember us.
I will. As an example of what we should never do ourselves.
You speak well now. Let us see how proud you are in 3 years.
For me, Racing the Night encapsulates all of Crusade's strengths as a show and the creative potential it had if it wasn't cancelled. The Needs of Earth, on the other hand, encapsulates many of the strengths of the characters, particularly Dorina and Dr. Chambers. Using Ranger intel, Gideon launches an illegal raid to capture a fugitive who possesses knowledge which could help save Earth. The premise of the episode is once again a strong showcase of Gideon's in-the-trenches approach to command. The first half, though, is a stronger showcase for Dorina as she risks life and limb to pull off the mission and drops hints of her backstory. The second half, however, refocuses on Chambers when she discovers the fugitive is actually carrying music and literature deemed subversive by his government. It's Straczynski once again tipping his hat to George Orwell, but it also forces Chambers and Gideon to confront the possibility that they may fail in their mission, and that they should prepare measures to save what little they can of humanity's true legacy.
Science is a universal constant. It's there for anyone to discover as long as you can do the math. But you don't just discover Ode on a Grecian urn, or Beethoven, or Gauguin. We talk about the needs of Earth. Well, there's more to it than the obvious. While we're waiting on science to discover the math that will lead to a cure, we need something to sustain us. Another culture forgot that. We can't. Not now. Not ever.
In contrast to the large-scale space adventure that Racing the Night was, The Needs of Earth is a far darker, more personal and philosophical story. Crusade's final episode, Each Night I Dream of Home, in a way is the synthesis of both. The Excalibur is sent back to Earth to pick up Dr. Stephen Franklin and help him run a radical medical experiment to study the Drak Plague. It has the spectacle of Racing the Night with a climactic space battle with the Drak and the personal stakes of The Needs of Earth, with a lowly plumber volunteering to be infected with the plague in order to return home to his wife. The episode really is Straczynski in top form, with a web of interpersonal conflicts and thematic questions all reaching their payoff in the final action sequence. It feels dramatic, tense, and thrilling all at once, and of course Richard Biggs reprising his role as Dr. Franklin is most welcome. Although Straczynski's own viewing order puts Each Night I Dream of Home as episode 7, watching it last at least means leaving Crusade on a high, and it ends the story on a hopeful, if open-ended note.
Life goes on.
Indeed it does.
Where Crusade would have gone and how it would have been received is anyone's guess. However, over the years, Straczynski has discussed what the intended arc was meant to be for the show and some of the details of where the characters were meant to end up. A number of scripts were completed to round out Season 1. One such episode, titled Value Judgments, would have seen the return of Walter Koenig as Alfred Bester. Apparently Koenig was already signed on to appear and was very enthusiastic about reprising the character. The central premise of the Excalibur searching for a cure to the Drakh Plague would actually have been resolved in Season 2. The show would then get stuck into a conspiracy arc surrounding Earth Force using leftover shadow technology. The setup for this is first seen in the Path of Sorrows, where Gideon's first ship is destroyed by an unknown vessel. Season 1 would have seen Gideon using the Apocalypse Box to hunt down this vessel and using the Excalibur to engage it in a close space battle, which would end in the hybrid ship self-destructing. In this same episode, an Earth Force officer would reveal the origin of the Technomages as servants of the Shadows who rebelled. Galen's true mission then has been to find and acquire any leftover shadow technology and keep it for the Technomages. The end of the season would have taken place on Mars, with Gideon investigating Earth Force shadow technology experiments, where he is shot and seemingly killed by a sniper. His consciousness would then have merged somehow with the Apocalypse Box, foreshadowed by Gary Cole also voicing the box itself. Prying into this conspiracy would eventually lead to the Excalibur crew becoming renegades out to expose the truth. As mentioned before, it's difficult to know how all of this would have played out, had the series not been cancelled. But in the end, I think Crusade showed a lot of promise. The cast were very strong, and many of its episodes told terrific stories. While it naturally pales in comparison to Babylon 5, it isn't really fair to judge Crusade by the same standard. It would be like comparing the first half of Babylon 5 Season 1 to all of Star Trek The Next Generation. While there are flashes of brilliance in there, the question of whether Crusade could have been as good as Babylon 5 is simply impossible to answer. In the end, all I can say is, I'm glad I watched it and I'm glad it exists, even if it exists only as a glimpse of what might have been. While Crusade was not to be, the Sci-Fi Channel's interest in the Babylon 5 universe presented Straczynski and the other producers with another crack at a spin-off. While the Sci-Fi Channel couldn't commit to a full series right away, they could offer the producers another television movie to serve as a backdoor pilot for a potential show. The result was Legend of the Rangers. Set 3 years after the end of Babylon 5, Legend of the Rangers follows disgraced Ranger David Martell as he's given command of an old vessel and sent on an escort mission where he and his crew encounter a new and dangerous alien threat known only as the Hand. The incomparable Andreas Katsoulas reprises the role of Jakar in his final performance as the character, and he naturally upstages many of the younger newcomers. Although there is a large ensemble cast like in Crusade, it seems the intention was for a central Kirk, Spock, McCoy type trio in Martell, Dulan and Cantrell. Martell was played by Dylan Neal, mostly known at the time for his roles in The Bold and the Beautiful and Dawson's Creek. Alex Zahara, who played Dulan, was no stranger to sci-fi at the time, being one of Stargate SG-1's reliable that guy actors, as well as making appearances in The Outer Limits and Andromeda. Miriam Sirois was mostly a voice actor before Legend of the Rangers, having performed in the Canadian English dubs for Ranma and Dragon Ball Z. Unlike previous Babylon 5 productions which shot in California, Legend of the Rangers was produced in Canada. While Straczynski, Douglas Netter, Christopher Franke and veteran B5 director Michael Viger returned, producer John Copeland had moved on to other projects by that time, his role being filled by Ron McLeod. Production designer John Iacovelli and directors of photography Fred V. Murphy and John C. Flynn were also unavailable, replaced with Stephen Geoghegan and Henry Chan. The series was also shot natively for a 16:9 aspect ratio for both its live action scenes and visual effects shots. The TV movie eventually debuted on the 19th of January 2002, 3 years after the end of Crusade. If Crusade was divisive among fans with lots of unfulfilled potential, Legend of the Rangers is little more than a blip for a lot of the Babylon 5 fandom. Whereas Crusade at least got half a season to give viewers a taste of what might have been, Legend of the Rangers has only 90 minutes. In the grand scheme of things though, I've always seen this TV movie as a harmless novelty. A quick dive back into the Babylon 5 universe for some action-adventure fun and not much else. The cast are decent enough, though only Martel and Dulan get anything interesting to do in terms of the story. The other characters seem like plenty of fun though.
The engine's there.
Oh, just a little fine-tuning. We'll be ready whenever you are. You're sure? Of course. Why would you think otherwise?
That's, good, Nafil. As you were.
Entertaining personalities who no doubt had rich backstories and interesting arcs to explore had the movie led to a full series. With just this pilot to go on though, this ensemble is fine. Visually, this is probably one of the best looking entries in the Babylon 5 universe. Having native 16:9 visual effects shots definitely helps. There's a lot of vibrant colour, depth and dynamism to the action sequences and space-based scenes. It's also nice to have Christopher Frankie's music make a return as well. Where I think Legend of the Rangers falls down, however, is that it's pretty by the numbers, both as a B5 story and as a sci-fi adventure in general. It's all well produced, well acted, and generally well written, but there isn't much else that really hooks the viewer. Really, the most noteworthy part of the movie is this utterly baffling zero-G holographic kung fu weapon system. I honestly cannot fathom the logic behind this concept. The head-scratching logic which created this thing could be forgiven if it at least looked cool, but on the whole it just looks goofy, and unfortunately it detracts from the excitement of a lot of the action sequences. The setup for what was likely going to be the main story arc for a potential series is also a little seen it all before. The hand ships certainly have a striking design and a nice motif in the score, but they feel like an attempt to one-up the shadows somehow. We're told the hand are even more ancient and powerful than the shadows, but we don't really see them do anything that really backs that up.
Compared to the hand, the shadows who straddled the galaxy on legs of fire during the Shadow War were nothing more than insects.
Despite its problems, Legend of the Rangers isn't terrible by any means, but within the context of the larger franchise, it does feel quite thin. And in that context, aside from the truly strange 3D martial arts weapon system, Legend of the Rangers is decent enough. At the time of its release, however, Legend of the Rangers was scheduled opposite the NFL playoffs and earned low ratings. Therefore, any potential plans for either a Crusade continuation or a Legend of the Rangers series were shelved, and it seemed so too was Babylon 5 as a whole. Years after the end of the series and the failed attempts at spin-offs, Babylon 5's cult following had grown in strength. Cast and crew regularly toured the convention circuit, and sales of home media and other tie-in products were strong. These strong sales also translated to the DVD releases of the 5 seasons of the show. The direct-to-DVD market was fertile ground in the mid to late 2000s, and Babylon 5's strong performance in this area encouraged Warner Brothers, the rights holders for the property at the time, to approach J Michael Straczynski about yet another foray into the Babylon 5 universe. At first, Warner Brothers broached the idea of doing a straight-to-DVD feature film in the same vein as the TV movies made during Season 5. Straczynski, however, had concerns around the budget of such a project, and how that might impact the quality of the final product. Instead, he proposed an anthology project. The idea had actually crossed Straczynski's mind before as a 6th season of the original show. Being a big fan of the Twilight Zone, he found the idea of an anthology set within the Babylon 5 universe very appealing. The result was Babylon 5 The Lost Tales, an anthology chronicling 2 stories following Lochley and Sheridan in the interim between Objects at Rest and Sleeping in Light. The production was shot on a budget of roughly $2 million, once again in Canada, with J Michael Straczynski writing, directing and producing this time. Once again, the project utilised some cutting-edge visual effects techniques, with a virtual production space built alongside a number of practical sets.
If I'm acting with Bruce here, then the cameras might be where you are, then they might come behind us, and they might come that side of us, and they might come that side of us. But Bruce and I, we don't swap positions, so we're kind of used to this scenario here. But with green screen, the green screen is behind us. So we have to do the scene once like this, and then once like this, and then once like this, and then once like this, and once like this. And of course, every time I turn to Bruce, there's a different background, there's different lights, and there might be a cameraman there might be something completely different, the lighting looks different. It is so confusing.
The visual effects themselves were handled by Atmosphere Visual Effects, also based in Canada. The models for Babylon 5 itself, as well as many of the show's iconic ships and locations, were recreated from scratch, using fan-created 3D models for reference. The DVD release also includes moving tributes to cast members Andreas Katsoulas and Richard Biggs, who both passed away before the release of The Lost Tales.
Every family, every studio, every show has its alliances and its factions and its feuds. This person likes that person, doesn't like that person over there. This person hates that person over there. Everyone liked Richard. Everyone liked Rick. I knew that the show mattered to him. I didn't know quite the extent to which it did matter, however. We got in line to pass by the casket. I ended up being the last person in line, and his wife was there, as well as his father and his 3 or 4 sisters. And I had met the wife once or twice. I wasn't sure she had recognized who I was. And I never met the family. And as you come up to them to pass on your regards, I thought, what should I say? And I get up there, and the wife sees me in line and starts crying and turns to her father-in-law, Richard's father, and just says, "It's Joe." She didn't say it's Joe Straczynski, didn't say the producer, it's Joe. And I found out at that moment how much the role mattered to him, how much he talked about it, and it was his favorite role of all time. Actually, the first time I created it was Jackarr, Jackarr. And at one point I was talking to Andreas, and he was rehearsing, and he introduced himself as Jackarr. And I pull him off to the side, and I said, "Jackarr?" He said, "I've decided I'm French." And I just started laughing. I said, "You know what? From now on, it's Jackarr." And we kept it. I have this theory that the more important and intimate the emotion, the fewer words are required to express it. For instance, in dating, will you go out with me? 6 words. I think I care for you, 5 words. You matter to me, 4 words. I love you, 3 words. Marry me, 2 words. Well, what's left? What's the one most important and intimate word you can ever say to somebody? It's goodbye. And I think of Andreas, I think of goodbye, and how important that was for me.
The project was announced at San Diego Comic-Con in July 2006 and released a year later on the 31st of July 2007.
I believe that when we leave a place, part of it goes with us, and part of us remains. Go anywhere in the station when it is quiet and just listen. After a while, you will hear the echoes of all our conversations, every thought and word we've exchanged. Long after we are gone, our voices will linger in these walls.
There was naturally a lot of excitement for Babylon 5 The Lost Tales when it was first announced. I know many fans of the show have always wondered what it would look like with modern visual effects and updated production values, and in that respect, The Lost Tales is a bit of a mixed bag. Many of the space-based shots look terrific, retaining that signature Babylon 5 look and bringing back the iconic station and the various spaceships with much more fidelity. However, many of the composite shots don't hold up as well, feeling strangely flat, overly lit, and in some ways low-res. The fully live-action segments are also a little cheap feeling. I feel as though in recreating the look of Babylon 5 so faithfully, it still looks like a production made in the 1990s as opposed to the 2000s. Being a low-budget anthology, I don't think anyone was expecting to see the kind of epic space opera the show became famous for, but even then it seems strange to revisit the universe to tell these particular stories. Part 1 follows Lochley, now a colonel, confronted by a maintenance worker who is apparently possessed by some kind of demon. Babylon 5 has always embraced spiritualism and ruminated on religion as much as it has with science and politics. However, the issue with this story comes down to what the actual jeopardy is supposed to be. The creature possessing this person explains that God seeded this part of space with fallen angels in order to keep humanity in check, to maintain their belief in God, even as they become more scientifically advanced. Discovering what seems like definitive proof of the supernatural is certainly unprecedented, but not much is done to explore this angle of the story, and the turmoil experienced by Father Cassidy also seems to come to a bit of a dead end. Really, it only feels like half a story. It ends with Lochley simply sending the man back to Earth along with whatever presence is inside him, alien, supernatural, or otherwise. It's never really clear if this creature ever presented a real threat. Frankly, I'm not really sure what to make of this one. The second story following Sheridan is a bit stronger. As President Sheridan comes up on the 10th anniversary of the Interstellar Alliance, Galen appears to him and tells him he must murder a young Centauri prince in order to stop a devastating war in the future. It's a classic moral conundrum. Can Sheridan, in good conscience, kill someone who is ostensibly innocent in the present, knowing they will become evil in the future? And this tension is genuinely palpable throughout the story, as we can see Sheridan really considering pulling that trigger. The character, after all, has made some very tough moral choices in the past, and so there's a real chance here he'll go through with it. But the solution he comes up with is a clever one, and his closing verbal joust with Galen is quite satisfying. Overall though, much like Legend of the Rangers, The Lost Tales is unfortunately little more than a curiosity for hardcore fans of the show. Upon release, The Lost Tales actually sold well on DVD, and Warner Bros. Was keen to make a follow-up. Straczynski, however, was admittedly disappointed with the final product, and would only commit to another entry in the Lost Tales series if Warner Bros. Could guarantee a larger budget for the follow-up. Straczynski already had a concept for a second batch of stories centering on Michael Garibaldi and Londo Mollari, and possibly taking place during the Telepath War. Straczynski even contacted Peter Jurasik, who was keen on reprising his role as Londo as long as Straczynski was involved. A writer's strike that year, however, derailed plans for a future release. After the strike, Warner Bros. Restated their interest in another installment, but wanted to budget it similarly to the first Lost Tales, something Straczynski wasn't happy with. The studio also couldn't guarantee Straczynski full creative control if a larger budget project ever got off the ground. By July 2008, J Michael Straczynski chose to shelve The Lost Tales and stated he didn't want to dilute Babylon 5's legacy with subpar DVD releases. And what a legacy that is. In today's television landscape, where serialized storytelling is the norm, it's hard to ignore Babylon 5's influence. Despite the conventional studio wisdom of the time being against it, the show proved its worth, winning critical acclaim, multiple prized accolades, and the eternal devotion of an incredibly passionate fanbase. The impact on the science fiction genre itself also cannot be understated. At a time when Star Trek was assumed to be the only game in town, it's arguable other mainstream and cult sci-fi hits like Stargate, Farscape, and the return of Battlestar Galactica only got off the ground because Babylon 5 proved there was room enough in pop culture for more than the adventures of the USS Enterprise. While it may not be the franchise juggernaut some other shows became, it still commands an incredible amount of respect and admiration to this day. And it's this legacy which makes the prospect of Babylon 5 someday returning an exciting one. At the time of writing, a Babylon 5 reboot with Straczynski once again at the helm has been announced as in active development. It's yet to be seen what will become of this new version and how it will turn out, but I know I will be there to watch it. Because to paraphrase Jacquard, the part of me that is excited and curious for the future is deeply thankful of the part of me that loves Babylon 5. Thank you for watching, everyone. This retrospective has been a huge amount of work, but a brilliant experience to make. I'd like to give an extra special thank you to all of my patrons and members who are currently scrolling by. If you like what I do and want to help the channel grow, jump down to the links below where you can support the channel and see videos like this early. Over the next few months I'll be doing some retrospective on a few movies such as Galaxy Quest among others. This is to give me some prep time for the next big 2-part feature-length retrospective review. Have a good one, and as always live long and prosper, and for now I'll leave you with a little teaser for what the next big retrospective will be.